I'm with the Lean Enterprise Institute. My name is Reich, and I wrote a book. That's right here. I'm here to talk a little bit about it. And I assume you're all familiar. We are a sister institute to the Lean Enterprise Academy. You heard Jim speak last night. He's our founder. And so I've been with that institute since 2011. Most of my career before that, I was with Toyota, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that experience too today. So basically what I want to talk to you about is this book. I want to share a little bit about, the book is about Hoshin Kanri. How many of you are familiar with Hoshin Kanri? Raise your hand. Oh boy. So I have a little task of education ahead of me today. But, it looks like about half of you. I'll get into, and it may be a familiarity with the Japanese term, which we can talk a little bit about today too. But I want to talk a little bit about what it is, of course, its history, and a little bit about who I am and why I wrote this book, and then what the book is about. This kind of fulfills for me, maybe just to say something, a little feather in my cap, it's a bucket list item for me. I graduated from college more than 40 years ago with a degree in English writing. This is before Toyota made me into an industrial engineer, which was a formidable task for Toyota to do. But I always wanted to write a book. And so I've finally done that. This is my first one. But this is from the foreword to the book. The foreword was written by a couple friends of mine, Jeff Leiker, who you may have heard about from the Toyota Way, and John Shook, who's written several books and is part of our institute. But take about 10 seconds and read that quote. That would be really great, right? If every organization kind of worked that way. I had a great setup last night from Mark Denton, which seems like, at least what I saw part of it, was a fair amount about alignment and teamwork in the organization. And I think that's what Hoshin Kanri is kind of meant to represent. So think about that today. In the book, John and Jeff refer to that as nirvana. But let's think about that as like our true north for what Hoshin Kanri can do in an organization. And as I explain it to you, maybe you'll get some understanding of that. Here's the definition that's written in the book. In the book, and so I'm just going to read this. It's basically represented as a management system for strategy that defines midterm and long-term direction, both your objectives and targets, and annually builds alignment horizontally and vertically to that direction, manages annual execution to the direction, and develops capability of people throughout the organization. Now, I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but what I learned Hoshin Kanri to be in Toyota, and I'll talk a little bit about my background related to that, is encompasses the full definition. Hoshin Kanri as a methodology was developed back in the early 60s. It was built from the quality movement, TQM movement, total quality management, and Edward Deming's teachings. Toyota was one of the pioneering companies in Japan. There were others, Bridgestone, that kind of started it. It was adopted in '63. The gentleman who was the chairman at the time, Eiji Toyota, who was the nephew of the founder, decided he would bring it into the organization to improve quality across the entire organization, not merely in manufacturing and product development functions, but across planning functions, etc. He assigned Mr. Nemoto, who was a managing officer in the organization, and another gentleman by the name of Mr. Sugiura, who was kind of the line leader responsible at that time for getting it kind of implemented across the organization. Interestingly enough, Mr. Sugiura is still alive. He's 92, he's pretty healthy, and next week I'm going to go see him. So it's like the godfather of Hoshin Kanri for Toyota. Kind of like meeting the Taiichi Ono of that movement. I'm going to get a chance to see him. But in the research for this book, I was able to find out a lot about him. Toyota introduced this really as a methodology to improve the organization, and particularly, I would say, to build leader capability in the organization. And so I'm going to share a little bit about my story. I left Toyota, as Dave mentioned, I've been with LAI since 2011. I came to LAI from Toyota. And I left the organization as a general manager from Toyota, as an executive. And so I had a chance to be developed as an executive in Toyota. And I want to tell you a little bit about my story, because I think it give you a little bit of context for why I wrote this book. I was in Japan, went to Japan in the mid-'80s, because pretty much the economy, I don't know where we're headed now, doesn't look real good. However, in the 80s, things were not good when I got out of college in the US, and the Japanese economy was booming. So I thought, maybe I'll try to go learn something there. I went to University of Nagoya in a graduate program to study Japanese. And at the end of that program, I asked my professors, I'd like to work for a Japanese company. Are there any Japanese companies that are hiring in the area? He said, well, we just happened to get a call this morning from Toyota. So, life is, I think, a combination of you make opportunities and you kind of stumbled into them. This is probably a combination of the both of those. I would have never heard that if I hadn't gone to Japan and had an opportunity to meet my professor. But again, that opportunity just came up that morning. So I joined a group called the Overseas Planning Division in Japan. There were probably a total in the organization of hundreds of thousands, well, in Japan, well over 100,000 people. I think there were maybe like 50 of us. I worked with John Shook there, who were not Japanese. But that group had responsibility for kind of being the conduit between engineering, that developed the vehicles, like our chief engineers, and the outside distributors, and we determined what was the specs, the pricing, supply for overseas markets. So that sounded like an interesting job. Before I got the chance to even go there, though, I was told to report to the Susumi assembly plant, which that's a plant in Japan that makes mostly mid-sized cars, things like the Camry. They were the mother plant for our plant in North America at Georgetown, Kentucky. But I got put on the assembly line, and I was asked to build cars for 3 months. Now, I actually couldn't work on the assembly line because in Japan at that time, at least, Japanese have gotten bigger, but they had a 180 centimeter limit on those that could work on this in terms of your height for people that could work on the assembly line. That was a safety requirement. So I worked on a side operation and built bumpers. And then, I learned in the course of that time that everybody who joins Toyota, at least in Japan, goes through that process of going and building cars. And then you go through a process of selling cars for 3 months. So before you ever enter a job, you've done those two things. So it makes you wonder why Toyota would do that. Well, I wrote the answer on there. I remembered in the course of my career that that's where the value creating work occurs. And wherever I went to planning functions, but if you went to HR, you went to a planning group, to a finance group, you should always remember that that's what the customer, those people are doing the work that the customer pays for, and it's pretty hard because you get to experience it yourself. I probably sent a lot of defective Camrys out in the course of that time. You also get a chance to, as a salesperson, and the Japanese are often very proud of what they've sold when they've had that experience, you get a chance to interact directly with customers. And at that time anyway, I don't know if this is true in UK, but in Japan, they sold cars door to door. So it was a pretty challenging experience. I eventually got a chance to go into the office, finally, to report to my job. My first week, I was assigned a mentor, which was awesome. He was a great guy, worked with me really closely over the next couple of years. I was also assigned a problem to solve, which was honestly, and with an A3, who's familiar with A3? Oh, you're much more familiar with that. That's good. But that was the most frustrating experience of my life, one of the most frustrating experiences of my life, very honestly. I was asked to solve a problem. I was given an A3 to write. It was blank. This is in the days, this is 88, so there were no computers. I had to write it by hand, and I probably rewrote it 10 to 12 times. I eventually got a chance, after all that, to take it in front of my manager and present it to him. And he asked me about it. How was that experience? So me being the honest American I am, I told him it was one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. And I feel like I've added no value. And he said, "You're right." I added no value. But then he said something to me that was has been really important. It probably kept me in Toyota for as long as I stayed. And that is, he said, "Your first 3 years in Toyota, you're not expected to add value. You're here to learn. We want you to learn because we know we will get value from you and you'll be with Toyota for a long time." So that was a good experience for me, looking back on it. At the time, it was quite frustrating. Now, having done that, I ended up working there for 6 years. I ended up also getting married to a Japanese woman. I had a daughter. So I left Japan in '94, and with a Japanese wife, a daughter, and a job that added no value. And I moved back to the US. And they put me in an organization called the Toyota Supplier Support Center, TSSC. I've only met one or two of you, but I see you, maybe friends from the Toyota Lean Management Center here. In some sense, we're a sister organization of yours, TSSC. TSSC was set up in North America in 1992, really it was open to any manufacturing company that was interested in implementing the Toyota production system. We worked often with suppliers, but I worked with furniture manufacturers and other companies. Now they've expanded their range of organizations they work with. They work with nonprofits and other organizations. But that was a great experience to learn about, the Toyota production system. And then I got tapped on the shoulder in 2001 from my boss, Mr. Obeya, who said, "We want to rotate you to the corporate headquarters to be responsible for our strategy group, corporate strategy group." I was a general manager at the time. And you'll have responsibility for what we call Hoshin Kanri in Toyota. And you'll be managing that across the organization. So I moved there. And it was a critical time in Toyota. I guess I was again, you make opportunities and you fall into them. This is one where Toyota was going through a major change, at least in North America. You can see these graphs kind of depict that, going off the graph actually, where between the decade of 98 to 2008, when the economy collapsed for everybody in the world, we grew probably triple our sales, but maybe in a more difficult sense, triple our production. I mean, we went from a situation where we had 3 kind of disparate factories in North America to one where we had 12, and not just assembly factories, but engine plants, unit plants. And it required that we stop reporting back to Japan and start working together. There was a whole initiative built around it called self-reliance. But Hoshin Kanri was really important in that process because we did not have alignment across the whole organization. So that helped us build alignment between our plants specific to how we improve the organization. And during the course of that time, we aligned to a vision and a plan on what we were going to do. So I ended up back at TSSC as the general manager for a little while. And then I left Toyota in 2011, as Dave mentioned, came to the Lean Enterprise Institute. People had heard about my experience from corporate strategy, managing Hoshin Kanri for Toyota. So I started to go out and see companies. And what I saw was really different from what I had experienced in Toyota. In Toyota, I kind of wrote as the target state, let's say. There was strategy up and down the organization. That meant, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, strategy developed at the top, strategy developed by departments and plants in the organization, and it was both top down and bottom up. It was based on a vision that we executed on, and it created sustained business results for the organization. What I saw out in the world, in various companies, and I went to a lot of industries, is strategy mostly was this thing that was developed at the top. Sometimes it got communicated somehow through an email. I see a lot of smiling faces. And it was represented often by a vision on a wall, which people might pass by. Again, that might be on the website that you could refer to it, but how does that relate to my work? Nobody could really say. And it ended up causing these isolated episodic initiatives that would occur in an organization that might create a little bit of good positive impact short term, but then fizzled. So the gap I saw between those two things was really the capability to execute on a vision. How do we actually achieve that? To engage people, which is part of that, and to do problem solving, and maybe the last point there, rigorous management system. So what is the PDCA, Plan, Do, Check Act, of ensuring that we achieve what we said we were going to do, which was strong from where I came from. So I ended up kind of summarizing this, what I learned, between Hoshin Kanri and traditional strategy. And what I had learned in Toyota, Hoshin Kanri to be, was deliver sustainable business results for the organization for the three stakeholders: customers, people, the people in the company, and the company itself, so it's successful. As opposed to what organizations often told me was to deliver on some quarterly financial results. The process was completely different. In Toyota, we focused on a vital few things. I recommend companies think about 3 to 5 of them over the course of a year that leadership and the company should focus on developing. I'd go to organizations where they have 30, 40 things that leadership has to accomplish. I won't go through all those points, but maybe the last one. Toyota had a fairly systematic process on how they built alignment across the organization, so that there was consensus on what they would do that for the coming year, as opposed to many organizations seem to be based on some measurable that some executives got to achieve. But maybe most importantly, the big difference I saw between what I saw outside and what I had learned in Toyota was about people. Hoshin Kanri in Toyota was a way to engage people up and down the organization, but very importantly, to develop capability of leadership in the organization. And that was often based on an understanding of what was happening, what we call the Gemba at the front line. Traditional strategy, things just got communicated down, and it mostly was a structure. It seems like it's mostly a structure for executive accountability. I'm going to give you a target and I'm going to hold you accountable to it. If you fail, you fail. That's your responsibility. In the course of developing this book, I've had a chance to interact with a lot of people. And I'm going to share with you a very brief video about this gentleman who's executive from Toyota. His name is Mr. Yoshino, who actually, this gentleman was John Shook's former boss. But he worked for a long time in corporate planning, and he worked for that guy I mentioned, the Hoshin godfather, Mr. Sugiura. And he has some interesting things to say. It's a short video.
One of the things which makes Toyota's Hoshin Kanri different is that big bosses, president or those high-rank officers are very serious about Hoshin Kanri Hoshin Kanri activities. And in other companies, maybe just bosses just make some decision, and okay, you guys do that. But in case of Toyota, they are very much serious because they are decision makers. They want to know more about what's going on in the shop floor, in the offices. So they, they are ready to receive all those comments and opinions from our employees. So top management always ready to listen to us. And so I was so happy to work in that Hoshin Kanri office because I have a lot of chance to talk high-rank general manager level of people across Toyota in headquarters area. So I found out general managers, they are so high up there, but still they always are very eager to check whether we are doing just like we promised on our Hoshin document, something like that. So Hoshin Kanri concept is very close to each of the key segments, up there and lower rank people. So that makes Toyota different from other companies, I believe.
Okay. So with that kind of context, I decided I can't help every organization in the world to do this. So it might be good to write down some of the learning I got both in Toyota and from seeing companies outside. And I put some notes in here around some of the key themes of the book. You know, I've worked in a lot of industries trying this out: construction, healthcare, of course, manufacturing, the hospitality industry. I'm currently working with a software company, but it's applicable in any industry, and it can be helpful in any industry. It creates good business results, but that requires vision and rigorous PDCA. It helps engage the workforce. It helps break down silos in the organization. The book itself and the content of the book, I decided I wanted to make something that's kind of practical that people can use, provides the basic thinking, but also provides some methodology and tools that you can try to apply in your own situation. It takes a case study of a lawnmower company it's a fictitious company, amalgamation of organizations I'd worked with, called True Mowers, and takes you through about a year of them applying and initially introducing Hoshin Kanri, the organization. It also talks about an important relationship between Hoshin Kanri, the strategic planning responsibility, daily management in the organization, and A3 as a problem-solving tool. And we also include, through the course of each of the chapters, something called Hoshin in Action, which is different executives and different companies sharing what they did as they applied this in their organization. And the book follows, I know I've mentioned PDCA. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with PDCA, but Plan, Do, Check, Act. And the first chapter of the book is about how the organization goes about developing their Hoshin. Then they execute on that and have to go through many PDCA cycles internal to that, how they go about a review, and then how do they take what they've done and evaluate the accomplishment and see, are these things that can be moved to daily management? And this is a big fault, actually, in many organizations, why they end up with 40 and 50 things, is because nothing gets taken off the plate of leadership. Something that's been accomplished, we need to standardize it and move it to daily management. And I depict it a little bit in the book this way. Just real quickly, Hoshin, it can be effective because you engage the workforce up and down, and you focus on vital things, it can be effective in getting some pretty good output pretty quickly. Some big leap performance. Daily management, the Kaizen, is equally critical in an organization. That gives you that sustained gradual impact. But if you combine the two, which like we did, I think, in Toyota, it provides you that sustained and innovative leaps and you can transition things to daily management where you can continuously improve them. This is another kind of illustration, an important illustration in the book that talks about how Hoshin Kanri supports problem solving at each level in the organization. So there's a big PDC at the top where you're developing the corporate Hoshin for the whole organization. You can break that down to department level Hoshins to see how those relate to the top and down to individual problem solving. What happens actually is it clarifies and delineates roles and responsibilities of everyone up and down the organization. So all of a sudden, someone who comes to work understands how they, whatever level of the organization they're in, contribute to the higher level goals of the company. And honestly, we spend third to half of our lives, if you're in a career at work. It'd be good to know that when I come to work today, I know what I'm how I'm contributing to the betterment of the company that I work for. I introduced something called the Strategy A3, which is just basically a structure for a leader to take a high-level Hoshin objective and define how they're going to accomplish it. And you can see, I built kind of that template around the Lean Transformation Framework. So what's currently happening related to that problem in current state to the process around the people and how they're being developed, what are the management systems? And there's examples in the book that are shared. This is an example of how Hoshin can be broken down in the book. And this is shown in the book. It's an example. The case in the book, as I mentioned, is about the lawnmower company. So their Hoshin objective is to launch electric mowers with innovative features that provide desired customer user experience. In the red, you can see those are the activities that they're trying to accomplish at the corporate level, which is led by the vice president of product development. Taking that, and you can break that down to the next level, like department level Hoshin. So program managers and engineering managers on the right there can take that high level direction and break that down into how they're going to decrease lead times to ensure new products are introduced or launched at every year in the trade show. I mentioned to you I applied this in many different industries. One of those industries where it was pretty successful is a company called Turner Construction. Turner Construction has been a partner of the Lean Enterprise Institute for quite a long time. They're a great company. People, just like Toyota, people work there 30 and 40 years. We worked with their New York business unit primarily. Actually, we're working with across the company now, but we started with the New York business unit, which is a big unit. Who's been to New York City? Okay, if you've been to New York City, and you look across that skyline of like skyscrapers, Turner probably built half of them. I mean, they're a pretty big, important company in an important industry in the United States. And they decided to do Hoshin in their organization because of this a little bit. The construction industry, unfortunately, their record on safety is pretty abysmal. 1 in 5 workplace deaths occur in the construction industry. This is just from 2022. And a lot of those deaths are due to slips, trips, and falls. Turner was equally guilty in this respect. The New York business unit in particular was not so great for various reasons. They built a lot of big skyscrapers. But this is just to show you an example of this is what a company can do in terms of developing their Hoshin. Their objective was to achieve 0 injuries. And there's some listing as to why they think that's the right thing to do. But they defined some very clear, concrete activities to accomplish those things. Like, I'll just talk about the first one, establish structure of weekly review and observation of pre-task plans across all projects. Pre-task plan is something that the contractor does at the beginning of the day to communicate to their team what work's going to be done and what potential safety hazards exist. That's something that they had struggled with. So they made that a priority. We also introduced in a book, and Turner did this as well, something we call Obeya. Now, Obeya is not unique to, it's kind of translated as large room. It's not unique to Hoshin. You know, it's applied in many areas in Toyota. But it's really helpful in Hoshin because this is a long-term activity. It's going to take months and years to accomplish. So how we're doing month to month is critical to know. Are we ahead or behind? And Turner Construction set up standards for that. They review with the senior vice president every month on their progress relative to this safety objective that I shared with you. They also built in, and I introduced this in the book, something called vertical catchball, which is that high-level leader, in this case in Turner Construction, that's the senior vice president, presents some high-level objectives for the organization that people he works for to accomplish, and they can take ownership and decide how to accomplish those things. And that builds capability. It's similar to the A3 concept to develop in the organization. And so in Turner, they did that. The leaders spent more time at the Gemba. They told me when I first met them that they'd spent a lot of time there, and I went with them, and they'd go to the job site and go into a conference room, as opposed to going out and looking at what issues exist relative to safety. Well, they changed that. And they also put in place a structure to solve problems daily related to any time a safety incident occurred. Charlie Murphy, who was the head of the senior vice president of the unit, said, within 48 hours, I want to hear about it, and actually want an A3 problem solving done to see how that problem has been rectified, not just in that situation, but shared across the organization. So this is an example, I won't share in detail, but of like mortar mixing. It's the cement mixing, kind of a pretty heavy job to do. Someone fell in the process of doing that and was hurt, and this is a problem-solving example that they put in place. In the book, I also talk about how you go about reflecting. You know, back to that key point I mentioned earlier of, okay, we've accomplished things, how do we move them off the plate again and into daily management? And the last thing I touch on is sustainability. You know, this is an effort that needs to be led by top leadership in the organization. If you try it once, it's like any other, it's a process. It's like anything else. If you go out and see a process on an assembly line, it's going to run every minute. You're not expected to do that process perfectly the first time you try it. In this case, your process is a year. I mean, the Hoshin process is, the PDCA is a year. So you've got to learn through that. That requires commitment longer term. You're going to fail at certain things the first year, but if you build standards in place and put in place a process that defines your inputs, what you're actually going to do, your outputs related to that, and hopefully those are good outputs related to products and services, improved processes, capabilities, you get good outcomes. Too many organizations start from the right side. What do we need to measure and to get the results we need? This is what happened with Turner, just to show you some results. I mean, they went from what they call, it's a common metric in the industry, a recordable incident rate of about 4.9 down to 0.93 in 2024. And they introduced, just to be clear, they introduced Hoshin Kanri. They were kind of on the way down, but they got stuck. And they introduced Hoshin Kanri in 2019, and it took them significantly lower. There's some other results in here of other organizations, but for the sake of time, I'll skip them. I think a big one for us is in LEI has been GE Appliances. You're familiar, everybody's familiar with GE. They're kind of a pretty amazing story in and of themselves, but over the last decade, they presented at our summit just last month. They've doubled their business. They're now the #1 appliance company in the United States. They've added 3,500 jobs in the US. So they're not going to struggle as much because they moved all those jobs from China. But thank you very much for your time, and see you.
And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest lean content.